They laughed at me. Right there in front of everyone at the Maple Glen block party, with the food trucks, the music stage, and the raffle table as their backdrop, they laughed like I was nobody. Like I didn't belong in the very backyard where I'd spent my entire childhood. My neighbor, Peter Vaughn, took the microphone with that smug smile he always wore when he thought he was winning. "And the final prize of the day, folks," he announced, pausing dramatically. "A full summer's access to the community garden, better known as Old Man Blake's backyard." The crowd roared with laughter, and I felt my cheeks burn. I stood frozen, heart pounding, hands trembling. That backyard wasn't community property. It was my grandfather's legacy, and more importantly, it was legally mine now. But facts didn't matter to them, only status and control. Janice Vaughn, Peter's wife, added loudly from the front row, "She doesn't even use the land. Why not let someone productive enjoy it?" More laughter, more humiliation. That's when Mayor Langston arrived, stepping onto the stage with a file folder in his hand. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Actually," he said calmly, "that land was never open to the community." He held up a document. "And this confirms its rightful ownership. Everyone here might want to pay close attention to the name on it." Silence fell over the crowd like a heavy blanket. He turned the paper around and said, "Clear as day. Cynthia Ann Blake. It's hers. All of it." The laughter died. The smiles melted away. And in that silence, I finally exhaled. For the first time in years. This is my story. My name is Cynthia Blake, and I was born and raised in Maple Glen, Vermont, one of those postcard-perfect towns where maple trees line the streets and everybody knows your name. And more importantly, they never let you forget where you stand in the town's unspoken hierarchy. My grandfather, Edward Blake, served as Maple Glen's most beloved mayor for nearly 3 decades. People still talk about how he transformed our little town from a forgotten spot on the map to a thriving community with character. He planted the first tree in what would later be named Blake Park, established the town's annual Maple Festival, and turned the spacious backyard of his modest colonial house into a sanctuary where he hosted everything from Easter egg hunts to 4th of July cookouts. Growing up, I spent more time in that backyard than anywhere else. I helped Grandpa plant his famous roses along the fence line, watched him build the gazebo where he'd later teach me to play chess, and learned the names of every bird that visited his carefully placed feeders. People called it a community space, but it was never public land. It was always part of the house. Deed, privately owned, generously shared. "The secret to a good life, Cindy," he would tell me, "is knowing the difference between generosity and surrender. You can share something without giving it away." I didn't fully understand what he meant until he was gone. Grandpa passed away 5 years ago. I was 27, working a soul-crushing corporate job in Boston, and feeling increasingly disconnected from everything that mattered. His funeral brought me back to Maple Glen, and standing in that backyard, his backyard after the service, I knew I couldn't leave again. "I'll take care of it, Grandpa," I whispered to the evening sky. "I promise." 2 weeks later, I moved into the family home. The reading of his will confirmed what I already knew. The house, the land, and everything on it was mine. Now, I gave notice at my job, packed up my apartment, and came home to preserve his legacy. But to some neighbors, especially Peter and Janice Vaughn, who had moved to Maple Glen just before Grandpa died, I wasn't Edward Blake's granddaughter and rightful heir. I was just that quiet woman who doesn't belong, an intruder in their vision for the neighborhood. The Vaughns lived in the large Tudor Revival across the street, a house they'd renovated into something that looked more suited to a celebrity magazine than our humble town. Peter ran a successful tech company remotely, and Janice hosted wine tastings and book clubs for the neighborhood women, gatherings to which I was technically invited but made to feel unwelcome. We just thought with Edward gone, the backyard would become community property, Janice said during one of our first encounters, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's such a shame to see it going unused." But I did use it, just not for their Instagram-worthy garden parties. Every Saturday morning, I lit a candle under the old maple tree where Grandpa used to sit with his morning coffee. I planted forget-me-nots along the fence line because they were his favorites. I kept his roses pruned, his bird feeders filled, and the gazebo freshly painted. I kept that space alive for him, for me, for the memories we shared. The trouble began about 3 months after I moved in. I came home from the grocery store to find a neighborhood kid jumping the fence to retrieve a frisbee from my yard. "Sorry, Miss Blake," he called out, not sounding sorry at all. Mr. Vaughn said it was okay since nobody was using it anyway. I let it slide. Kids will be kids, after all. But then, during a community cleanup day, someone installed a bench on my property without asking permission. A week later, I found a new path of stepping stones leading from the side gate to the gazebo. The following month, a sign appeared on my fence. Blake Garden, open sunrise to sunset. I removed the sign immediately and called Peter Vaughn. It's not a public garden, I explained, trying to keep my voice level. It's private property. Oh, Cynthia, he said with a chuckle that made my skin crawl. Your grandfather always shared that space. We're just honoring his tradition. By putting up signs on my property without permission, the community has fond memories of spending time there. You can't just cut everyone off because you want privacy. I'm not cutting anyone off, I insisted. I'm simply asking for basic respect of property boundaries. His sigh was audible through the phone. Look, your grandfather understood what it meant to be part of a community. Maybe you should try to follow his example instead of being so territorial. The conversation ended there, but the encroachments didn't. People continued to wander into my yard as if it were a public park. Sometimes they'd wave awkwardly if they saw me watching through the window. Other times, they'd look annoyed, as if I was the intruder in my own space. One evening, I overheard Janice talking to another neighbor as they walked past my house. It's such a waste, she said, not bothering to lower her voice. Edward Blake would be heartbroken to see how she's hoarding that beautiful space all to herself. It's practically abandoned. The words stung, but I refused to let them see me cry. Instead, I retreated deeper into the house that night, away from the windows, away from their judgment. What they didn't understand, what they refused to see, was that I was protecting something precious. Not just land or property rights, but a sacred connection to the man who had meant everything to me. The backyard wasn't just soil and plants. It was the last physical space where I could feel my grandfather's presence. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Spring arrived in Maple Glen with a vengeance that year, bringing with it not just blooming flowers, but also escalating tensions. The neighborhood association, headed, of course, by Peter Vaughn, announced its quarterly meeting with an agenda that made my blood run cold. Community Green Space Initiative, expanding public access to underutilized private gardens. I knew exactly which underutilized private garden topped their list. The meeting was held in the community center on a Tuesday evening. I sat in the back row, arms crossed, watching as Peter commanded the room with practiced charisma. Charts and graphs displayed on a projector showed the benefits of shared green spaces and community wellness statistics. Studies show that accessible green spaces improve mental health by up to 30%, Peter explained, clicking to the next slide. A satellite view of our neighborhood with certain properties highlighted in green. My backyard was outlined in red. Our proposal identifies several spaces that could be incorporated into a network of community gardens and relaxation areas. I raised my hand, and Peter's smile tightened as he acknowledged me. Yes, Cynthia. I notice my property is included in your proposal, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I wasn't consulted about, this. This is the consultation, he replied smoothly. We're discussing it now, as a community. But you've already marked my land as part of your initiative, I pointed out. That suggests decisions have been made before any discussion took place. Janice cut in from her seat beside Peter. Cynthia, this isn't about ownership. It's about accessibility. Your grandfather understood the importance of shared spaces. My grandfather chose when and how to share his private property, I countered. He never surrendered his right to make those decisions. An older woman 2 rows ahead of me turned around. Mrs. Finch had been my elementary school librarian and one of Grandpa's closest friends. She's right, she said firmly. Edward was generous, but he was clear about boundaries. That land belongs to Cynthia now. Peter cleared his throat. Nobody is disputing ownership, Margaret. We're simply proposing a voluntary program where homeowners with larger-than-average yards can opt into a community sharing arrangement. With proper scheduling and guidelines, of course. And if I choose not to opt in? I asked. His smile never wavered. Well, that would be your right, but the association will be offering tax incentives and maintenance support to participants. It would be a shame to miss out on those benefits. I recognized the threat beneath his words. This wasn't about community wellness. It was about control. The meeting continued with discussions about implementation timelines and volunteer committees, but I barely heard any of it. My mind was racing, calculating my next move. After the meeting, Mrs. Finch approached me in the parking lot. "Your grandfather would be proud of you for standing your ground," she said, patting my arm. "Peter Vaughn thinks money and influence can get him anything he wants." "He seems to have most of the neighborhood convinced," I replied. "Not everyone," she assured me. "Some of us remember how things used to be, and how your grandfather ran this town with integrity, not intimidation." Her words gave me strength, but I knew the battle was just beginning. The following day, I received an official letter from the Neighborhood Association outlining the Community Green Space Initiative and requesting my voluntary participation. Attached was a draft agreement that would essentially grant public access to my backyard during daylight, hours, 7 days a week. I tore it up and dropped it in the recycling bin. 3 days later, I came home to find surveyor stakes placed along the perimeter of my property. A note attached to one read, "Preliminary Assessment for Community Pathway Project. Questions? Contact Neighborhood Association." I pulled every stake from the ground and marched across the street to the Vaughn's imposing house. When Janice answered the door, her expression of surprise quickly morphed into practiced politeness. "Cynthia, what a pleasant—" "Stop," I interrupted, holding up the surveyor stakes. "These were on my property without my permission. This has to end, Janice." She sighed dramatically. "The survey team must have misunderstood the boundaries. We're only mapping potential pathways on participating properties." "I'm not participating," I said firmly. "And I never will. My land is not up for discussion or committee vote or community annexation. It's mine." "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "some people are saying it's rather selfish of you to keep such a beautiful space all to yourself when you barely use it. What I do or don't do with my property is no one's business but mine," I replied, "and I'd appreciate if you'd respect that." As I turned to leave, she called after me. "Your grandfather was a community man, Cynthia. He would have wanted his legacy to continue." I stopped, but didn't turn around. "My grandfather taught me that true generosity comes from choice, not coercion. Maybe you should remember that." That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, eventually finding myself in Grandpa's study, surrounded by his books and mementos. On his desk sat a framed photo of us together in the backyard, both of us kneeling in the garden, dirt on our hands and smiles on our faces. I must have been about 8 years old. "What would you do, Grandpa?" I whispered to the empty room. The answer came to me not in words, but in memory. Grandpa standing at a town meeting, calmly but firmly defending a historical building from developers who wanted to tear it down for a parking lot. "Some things are worth protecting," he had said. "Not because they're profitable, but because they're precious." The next morning, I called a lawyer. The law office of Harriet Simmons occupied the second floor of Maple Glen's oldest brick building, overlooking the town square. Its worn wooden floors creaked under my feet as I entered, carrying a large envelope containing my grandfather's property deed, his will, and photographs documenting the recent encroachments on my land. "Miss Blake," Harriet greeted me, rising from behind her antique desk. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, sharp and perceptive, missed nothing. "I knew your grandfather well. Fine man. Thank you for seeing me on short notice," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "Edward Blake's granddaughter never needs an appointment," she replied with a small smile. "Now, tell me what's troubling you." For the next hour, I laid out the situation. The gradual intrusions, the community garden proposal, the surveyor stakes, and Peter Vaughn's thinly veiled threats about missing out on benefits if I didn't participate in his initiative. Harriet listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and removed her reading glasses. "Your grandfather was meticulous about his affairs," she said. "I helped him update his will and property documents shortly. Before he passed, there's no ambiguity about ownership. The land is unquestionably yours. So, legally, they can't force me to participate in this community garden scheme?" "Certainly not," she confirmed. "However, there are other ways the association might apply pressure. They could raise issues about property maintenance, fence heights, or any number of municipal codes if they're determined to make things difficult for you. So what do I do?" Harriet tapped her pen against the desk thoughtfully. "First, we send a formal cease and desist letter regarding the unauthorized entry onto your property and the placement of signs or structures without permission. Second, I'll review the association's bylaws to identify any potential vulnerabilities in their proposal. She paused, studying me. But legal measures alone won't solve the underlying issue, Cynthia. This is about community dynamics as much as property rights. Meaning? Meaning Peter Vaughn has been cultivating influence in this town since he arrived. He's donated to local charities, sponsored the summer concert series, and positioned himself as a progressive force for change. People like him, or at least, they like what he represents. I sighed. So, even if I'm legally right, I'll still be the villain. Not necessarily, Harriet replied, her eyes twinkling with sudden inspiration. Your grandfather knew that in small towns, perception often matters more than reality. Perhaps it's time to change the narrative. The following week, a certified letter from Harriet's office was delivered to the Vaughn's house and the neighborhood association. It outlined my legal rights as the property owner, cited relevant local ordinances about trespassing and unauthorized installations, and demanded the immediate cessation of all activities related to my land without express written permission. Peter's response came swiftly, not in writing, but in action. The next edition of the neighborhood newsletter featured a front-page article about the Green Space Initiative, complete with quotes from residents lamenting the obstructionist attitudes preventing community progress. Though I wasn't named directly, everyone knew who they meant. Following Harriet's advice about changing the narrative, I decided to take a more public approach to honoring my grandfather's legacy. I contacted the local historical society and offered to host an exhibition about Edward Blake's contributions to Maple Glen. The director, Eliza Montgomery, was enthusiastic. We've been wanting to do something like this for years, she told me. Your grandfather kept so many records and photographs documenting the town's development. I have boxes of his papers in the attic, I said. And I was thinking we could hold a small reception in the backyard, invite some of his old friends and colleagues to share their memories. Eliza's eyes lit up. That would be perfect. We could record their stories for the town archives. As word spread about the Edward Blake Memorial Exhibition, I noticed a subtle shift in community attitudes. People who had avoided eye contact with me at the grocery store now stopped to ask about the event. Several longtime residents offered to loan personal items, photographs, letters, even the original gavel from his mayoral days, for the display. Mrs. Finch volunteered to help organize the oral history recordings. It's about time someone reminded this town who Edward Blake really was, she said firmly, not just as mayor, but as a neighbor and friend. The day before the exhibition was set to open, I was in the backyard setting up tables for the reception when Peter Vaughn appeared at the gate. He was alone, which was unusual. Typically, he preferred to have an audience. Afternoon, Cynthia, he called, his voice carefully neutral. Mind if I come in? I hesitated, then nodded. He walked across the lawn, taking in the transformation. I'd spent weeks restoring the backyard to its former glory. The rose bushes were pruned and blooming, the gazebo freshly painted, and solar lanterns hung from the maple branches, just as Grandpa had done for summer gatherings. Looks nice, Peter admitted, stopping a few feet away. I hear the Historical Society event is generating quite a buzz. People remember my grandfather fondly, I replied. They're happy to celebrate his contributions. He nodded, slowly. That's actually why I'm here. The association would like to recalibrate our approach to the Green Space Initiative. I raised an eyebrow. Recalibrate? We're considering a more voluntary framework, he explained, choosing his words carefully. Less structured, more in keeping with Maple Glen's traditions of individual choice and community respect. Translation? They were backing. Down. I'm glad to hear it, I said evenly. I think that aligns better with how my grandfather viewed community participation. Peter cleared his throat. Yes, well, we're also wondering if you might consider allowing the association to sponsor one of the exhibition days. It would show solidarity and support for preserving Edward's legacy. I nearly laughed at the transparent attempt to save, faced by associating with an event that was already proving popular. Instead, I nodded graciously. The Historical Society is handling the scheduling, but I'm sure they'd welcome the association's involvement. You should speak with Eliza Montgomery. Relief flickered across his face. Excellent. I'll do that. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Janice and I would like to attend the reception tomorrow, if that's acceptable. The reception is open to anyone who respected my grandfather, I replied carefully. He accepted the veiled condition with a tight smile and left. The Edward Blake Memorial Exhibition opened the following afternoon to a crowd that exceeded everyone's expectations. The Historical Society had created beautiful displays chronicling Grandpa's life from his childhood in Maple Glen through his years of public service. Photographs, newspaper clippings, and personal artifacts told the story of a man who had loved his town deeply and served it with integrity. In the backyard, beneath the spreading maple tree, neighbors gathered to share memories and record stories for the archive. Even Mayor Langston attended, reminiscing about how Edward Blake had mentored him when he first entered town politics. Edward always said that leadership wasn't about having power, the mayor told the assembled crowd. It was about empowering others. As the afternoon progressed, I noticed Peter and Janice Vaughn standing awkwardly at the edges of various conversations, clearly feeling out of place among people who had actually known my grandfather. Eventually, they made their way to where I stood near the gazebo. "This is quite an event," Janice said, her usual confidence subdued. "I had no idea your grandfather was so influential." "He preferred connected," I corrected gently. "He believed influence was fleeting, but connections, real human connections, endured." Peter nodded, a hint of genuine respect in his expression. The Historical Society mentioned they'd like to make this an annual event. The association would be interested in discussing how we might support that tradition. I smiled. "I think that's a conversation worth having." As they moved away, Mrs. Finch appeared at my side, her eyes twinkling. "Well played, my dear," she murmured. "Your grandfather would be proud." For the first time since moving back to Maple Glen, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. The backyard, Grandpa's backyard, my backyard, was being recognized not as community property to be claimed, but as a private space with historical significance to be respected. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a beginning. By mid-July, the tensions that had dominated the spring months had subsided to a wary detente. The Community Green Space Initiative had been quietly postponed for further community input, according to the neighborhood newsletter. Peter Vaughn had shifted his energies to organizing the annual summer block party, a tradition dating back decades in Maple Glen, but one that had grown increasingly elaborate under his direction. I was working in the garden one morning, deadheading the black-eyed Susans that bordered the gazebo, when a shadow fell across the flower bed. Looking up, I found Janice Vaughn standing on the other side of the fence, watching me. "Your flowers are beautiful," she said, her voice lacking its usual edge. "Thank you," I replied, brushing dirt from my hands. "My grandfather taught me everything I know about gardening." She nodded, glancing around the yard with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "We never had a proper garden growing up. My mother wasn't the outdoor type." Something in her tone, a hint of wistfulness, made me pause. "Would you like to come in?" I was about to take a break. Surprise registered on her face, quickly replaced by careful neutrality. "I don't want to interrupt your work." "It's fine," I said, gesturing toward the patio, where a pitcher of iced tea waited. I could use the company. Hesitantly, she unlatched the gate and stepped into the yard. We settled at the small wrought iron table beneath the maple tree, and I poured 2 glasses of tea. "I've been meaning to tell you," she began after an awkward silence. "The historical exhibition was really quite moving. I had no idea your grandfather had accomplished so much for the town." "He loved this place," I said simply. "Every part of it. Peter and I moved here because of the community reputation," she confessed. "Our last neighborhood in Connecticut was, well, let's just say people kept to themselves. We wanted something different, and Maple Glen certainly is that." I agreed. She took a sip of tea, studying me over the rim of her glass. "Can I ask you something? Why did you move? Back? You had a career in Boston, from what I understand." The question wasn't hostile, just curious, and I found myself answering honestly. "After Grandpa died, this place was empty. Not just the house. It was like a hole had been torn in the fabric of the town. I couldn't bear the thought of strangers living here, changing everything he built. So it was about preserving his memory? Partly, I admitted, but also about finding my own place. I never felt right in the corporate world, always putting on a persona that wasn't really me. Here, even with all the recent tensions, I feel authentic." Janice nodded slowly. "I understand that more than you might think." She glanced toward her own house across the street. "The persona can become exhausting." We sat in surprisingly comfortable. Silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I should tell you, Peter is planning something for the block party. Something involving your backyard." My guard instantly went up. "What do you mean?" She looked uncomfortable. "He's been meeting with the planning committee without me. I overheard him on the phone mentioning a grand prize related to the Blake property." After everything that's happened, he's still trying to claim access to my land? I don't know the details, she said, rising from her chair, but I thought you should be warned. Despite the Historical Society event and the positive press, he still believes the backyard should be community property. Why are you telling me this? I asked, genuinely puzzled by her sudden shift in allegiance. Janice paused at the gate. Because sometimes preserving a facade becomes more costly than being honest. She offered a thin smile. Thank you for the tea, Cynthia. As she walked away, I sat stunned by the exchange. Was it a genuine warning or some new strategy? With the Vaughns, it was impossible to be certain. The following week, official block party invitations appeared in everyone's mailboxes. The event would be held on the town green, featuring food trucks, local musicians, games for children, and, prominently advertised, a special raffle with unique neighborhood experiences as prizes. My suspicions grew when Peter appeared at my door 2 days later, clipboard in hand. Cynthia, glad to catch you at home. We're collecting donations for the block party raffle. Thought you might want to contribute. Something, perhaps a handcrafted item? I recall seeing some lovely quilts at the historical exhibition. His transparent attempt to secure my participation while avoiding any mention of my property made my decision easy. Actually, I have a quilt my grandfather and I made together when I was in high school, I said. It's called Maple Glen Memories. Each square represents a different town. Landmark. Peter's eyes lit up. Perfect. That's exactly the kind of personal, community-oriented prize we're looking for. I'll put you down for that. After he left, I called Harriet Simmons. I need to know exactly what legal rights I have regarding my property, I told her. And I need documented proof of ownership that I can carry with me to this block party. Expecting trouble? She asked. Let's just say I'm preparing for all possibilities. 2 days before the block party, I made a strategic visit to the town hall. Mayor Langston's secretary, Betty, had known me since childhood and waved me straight into his office. Cynthia Blake, the mayor greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. What brings you to the halls of bureaucracy today? I need your help, Mayor Langston, I said, sitting in the offered chair. I believe there may be an attempt to publicly misrepresent the ownership status of my property at the upcoming block party. His expression grew serious as I explained the situation. Janice's warning, Peter's careful avoidance of mentioning the yard when collecting raffle donations, and the pattern of escalating encroachment over the past months. That's a serious accusation, he said when I finished. Do you have evidence of their intentions? Nothing concrete, I admitted. But given recent history, I wanted to ensure the town's official position on the matter is clear. Mayor Langston tapped his fingers thoughtfully on his desk. Your grandfather was not only my predecessor, but my mentor. I wouldn't be sitting in this chair if not for Edward. Blake. He reached for his phone. Betty, could you please bring me the property records for 42 Maple Street? And call Franklin from the records department. I need the original deed and any associated easements or restrictions. He turned back to me. I'll review everything personally and bring the official documentation to the block party. If anyone attempts to misrepresent property boundaries or ownership, I'll be there to set the record straight. Relief washed over me. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he cautioned. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But as the day of the block party dawned bright and clear, I knew in my heart that it would. The annual Maple Glen Block Party transformed the town green into a festival of colors, sounds, and smells. Red, white, and blue bunting draped. From lampposts, local musicians played folk songs from a makeshift stage, and the air was rich with the aromas of grilled meats and fried dough from a line of food trucks. I arrived early, carrying my grandfather's quilt in a protective cloth bag. The raffle table was already set up near the stage, manned by volunteers wearing matching t-shirts with Community First printed across the front. Peter Vaughn's unofficial slogan. Cynthia, you made it! Called Eliza from the Historical Society booth. Come see what we've done with the Edward Blake display. I walked over, grateful for the friendly face. The booth featured enlarged photographs from the memorial exhibition, including one of my grandfather standing proudly in his backyard garden, surrounded by neighborhood children, during an Easter egg hunt. It's wonderful, I said, genuinely touched by the tribute. People have been stopping by all morning to share memories, Eliza told me. Your grandfather made quite an impact on this town. As we chatted, I noticed Peter Vaughn making his way through the crowd, shaking hands and slapping backs like a politician on the campaign trail. He spotted me and changed course, heading in my direction with Janice trailing behind him. Cynthia, glad you could make it, he boomed, loud enough for nearby conversations to pause. Did you bring your donation for the raffle? I patted the bag containing the quilt. As promised. Excellent. Let's get it set up at the display table. We're arranging all the prizes so people can see what they're trying to win. I followed him to the raffle area, where various items were artfully arranged: gift baskets from local businesses, handcrafted jewelry, bottles of Vermont maple syrup, and a gift certificate for dinner at the town's only upscale restaurant. A volunteer took my quilt, carefully unfolding it and draping it over a display rack. The patchwork squares, depicting the town gazebo, the covered bridge, the old mill, and yes, my grandfather's beloved garden, drew immediate attention from passers-by. It's beautiful, one woman remarked, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. Your grandfather helped design this? We worked on it together during my senior year of high school, I explained. It was his way of teaching me about the town's history. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. On a separate table, somewhat apart from the other prizes, stood a professionally printed sign: Grand Prize, Summer Access to Blake Garden, Maple Glen's Hidden Gem. Below it, a glossy photograph showed my backyard in full bloom, clearly taken without my permission. The fine print detailed weekend access from June through September, and perfect for small gatherings or quiet contemplation. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The audacity, the sheer disrespect of raffling off access to my private property without my knowledge or consent left me speechless. Is something wrong? Peter asked, appearing at my elbow with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He'd been watching for my reaction. You know exactly what's wrong, I said quietly, conscious of people nearby. Take it down. Now. It's just a bit of fun, he replied smoothly. The community has fond memories of spending time in that garden. We're simply reviving a beloved tradition. A tradition based on invitation, not entitlement, I countered. That property is privately owned, Peter. You have no right to offer access to it. He sighed dramatically. Cynthia, you're making this personal when it's about community. Your grandfather understood the value of shared spaces. Don't presume to tell me what my grandfather understood, I said, my voice low but steady. Take down that sign and remove my property from your raffle, or I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities. Peter's smile hardened. The mayor is already here, as are half the town council members. By all means, involve them in your territorial dispute. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to hear how Edward Blake's granddaughter is denying the community access to a space they've enjoyed for generations. He walked away, leaving me shaking with anger and a growing sense of public humiliation. People were watching now, whispering behind their hands. I felt trapped. Making a scene would only reinforce the narrative that I was selfish and uncooperative, but allowing the raffle to proceed would set a dangerous precedent. I was contemplating my next move when Janice approached, her expression unreadable. I tried to warn you, she said softly. Did you know about this? I demanded. She glanced away. Not the specifics, just that he was planning something involving your property. And you did nothing to stop it. What would you have me do? She asked, a flash of genuine emotion breaking through her carefully maintained facade. He doesn't listen to me any more than he listens to you. Before I could respond, the loudspeakers crackled to life, and Peter's voice boomed across the green. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, the raffle drawing will begin in 15 minutes. Make sure you've purchased your tickets for a chance to win some amazing prizes, including exclusive summer access to the historic Blake Garden. People began moving toward the raffle table, tickets in hand. I spotted Mayor Langston near the food trucks and made my way through the crowd toward him, my heart pounding. Mayor Langston, I called, relieved when he turned and saw me. Cynthia, he greeted me, his expression shifting as he registered my distress. Is everything all right? They're raffling off access to my backyard, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Without my permission, Peter Vaughn has set it up as the grand prize. The mayor's eyebrows shot up. Is that so? He glanced toward the raffle table, where a small crowd had gathered to examine the prizes. I brought the property. Documents as you requested. Perhaps it's time to put them to use. Together, we walked toward the stage where Peter was organizing tickets for the drawing. His confident smile faltered slightly when he saw us approaching. Mayor Langston, just in time for the raffle. Would you like to draw the first winner? Actually, Peter, I'm here about a matter of public record, the mayor replied, his voice carrying enough authority to quiet the nearby conversations. It's come to my attention that you're offering access to private property as a raffle prize without the owner's consent. Peter waved dismissively. It's all in good fun, Mayor. The Blake Garden has been a community gathering place for decades. We're simply continuing that tradition. Tradition doesn't supersede property law. Mayor, yes, Langston countered, removing a folder from his jacket. I have here the official deed and property records for 42 Maple Street, including the land commonly referred to as Blake Garden. These documents clearly state that the property is privately owned, with no public easements or access agreements. He opened the folder and pointed to a section of the document. Furthermore, when Edward Blake updated his will 5 years ago, he specifically transferred full and exclusive ownership to his granddaughter, Cynthia Ann Blake. A murmur ran through the growing crowd. I caught sight of Mrs. Finch watching with a small, satisfied smile. Eliza from the Historical Society had edged closer, concern etched on her face. Peter's confident demeanor slipped further. Mayor, with all due respect, this is hardly the time or place for a property dispute. We're celebrating community today. Indeed we are, Mayor Langston agreed. And part of what makes our community special is our respect for one another's rights and boundaries. The raffle prize offering access to Ms. Blake's private property must be withdrawn immediately. The crowd had grown silent, all eyes moving between Peter, the mayor, and me. I could feel the weight of their attention, the mixed emotions, curiosity, judgment, confusion. Some were clearly disappointed, while others seemed uncomfortable with the public confrontation. Peter glanced around, assessing the mood. Then, with practiced grace, he stepped forward. Of course, if there's any question about the propriety of the prize, we'll withdraw it immediately. The neighborhood association would never want to overstep legal boundaries. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about the traditional nature of access to that space. There's no misunderstanding, I said, finding my voice at last. The garden has always been private property, generously shared at the owner's discretion. That discretion now belongs to me. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Finch began to applaud. Eliza joined in, followed by several older residents who had known my grandfather well. The applause wasn't universal. Many stood with arms crossed or hands at their sides, but it was enough to shift the energy of the moment. Mayor Langston nodded to Peter. I believe the matter is settled. You'll remove the garden access from the prize offerings. Backed into a corner, Peter had no choice but to agree. Of course, we'll substitute a gift certificate to Green Thumb Nursery instead. As the crowd dispersed and Peter hurried to make adjustments to the raffle display, Mayor Langston turned to me with a gentle smile. Your grandfather would have handled that exactly the same way, with dignity and respect for the facts. Well done, Cynthia. For the first time in months, I felt something like victory. The block party continued after the confrontation, but the atmosphere had changed. People seemed to move around me in wide circles, as if I were surrounded by an invisible force field. Some offered awkward smiles or nods of acknowledgement, while others averted their eyes entirely. I didn't know which reaction was worse. I stayed until my quilt was won by a young couple new to town. They seemed genuinely delighted with the prize, unaware of the earlier drama, then slipped away as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the green. Walking home alone, I replayed the confrontation in my mind. The public vindication had been satisfying in the moment, but now I felt strangely hollow. Yes, my property rights had been affirmed, but at what cost to my place in the community? I had won the battle, but possibly lost something more important: acceptance. As I approached my house, I noticed a figure sitting on my front steps. Janice Vaughn rose as I drew closer, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. Can we talk? She asked. I nodded, too exhausted for suspicion, and unlocked the front door. We settled in the living room, where photographs of my grandfather watched from the mantelpiece. I owe you an apology, Janice began after a long silence. I knew what Peter was planning was wrong, but I didn't stop him. Why not? I asked simply. She looked down at her hands. It's complicated. Peter and we're not in a good place. Haven't been for some time. She glanced up. That's not an excuse, just context. I appreciate the warning you gave me, I acknowledged. It helped me prepare. The look on his face when the mayor pulled out those documents, she said with a small smile. I've never seen him so caught off guard. Despite everything, I found myself smiling too. It was rather satisfying. He won't forgive you easily. she warned, serious again. Peter doesn't handle public challenges well. He'll find another approach. Why are you telling me this? Won't he be angry with you too? Janice sighed deeply. Probably, but I'm starting to realize I've spent too many years worrying about Peter's anger. There are more important things. We sat in companionable silence for a moment before she spoke again. You know, when we first moved here, I was enchanted by this town. The history, the sense of community, the beautiful old homes. I wanted to belong so badly. And now I wonder if I've been trying to belong to the wrong things, she admitted. Status, influence, the right social circles. None of it has made me happy. The vulnerability in her confession caught me off guard. For months, I'd seen Janice as an extension of Peter, equally committed to their campaign of community. Control. Now I was glimpsing a different person beneath the polished exterior. It's never too late to change direction, I said gently. She nodded, rising to leave. Thank you for listening, and for not saying, I told you so. That's not really my style, I replied. At the door, she paused. Your grandfather's garden, it really is beautiful. Not because it could be a community space, but because it's loved by someone who understands its value. After she left, I walked through the quiet house to the backyard. Twilight was settling over the garden, painting the flowers in soft lavender and gold. The maple tree's leaves rustled in the evening breeze, and somewhere nearby, a mourning dove called to its mate. I sat on the bench beneath the tree, in the exact spot where my grandfather had taught me to identify constellations as a child. The memory was so vivid I could almost hear his voice. The stars have been there forever, Cindy girl. They remind us that our problems are temporary, but beauty is eternal. Morning brought unexpected consequences. My phone rang early. Eliza from the Historical Society, her voice tight with concern. Have you seen the community forum yet? She asked, without preamble. No. Why? Peter Vaughn posted a statement about yesterday's events. Well, you should read it yourself. I pulled up the Maple Glen Community Forum on my laptop and found Peter's post pinned at the top. A statement on community values and private interests. Yesterday's unfortunate incident at our beloved block party has prompted important reflection on the direction of our community. For generations, Maple Glen has thrived on shared spaces and collaborative spirit. The sudden privatization of traditionally accessible areas threatens this foundation. While we respect legal property rights, we must ask ourselves, what kind of community do we want to be? One where generous traditions are maintained, or one where individual interests supersede collective well-being? The Neighborhood Association remains committed to preserving Maple Glen's character of openness and inclusion. We invite all community-minded residents to join us in this important conversation about our shared future. Peter Vaughn, Neighborhood Association President. The comments section had exploded with opinions. Some supported Peter's vision of community access, while others defended private property rights. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but everyone knew who the post was about. He's reframing the whole situation, I told Eliza, anger building as I scrolled through the comments, making it sound like I'm somehow betraying the town by asserting my legal rights. That's exactly what he's doing, she agreed. And it's working with some people, but not everyone is buying it. She was right. Among the comments supporting Peter were several defending me, including a strongly worded post from Mrs. Finch, reminding everyone that Edward Blake had always maintained clear boundaries about when and how his property could be accessed. What should I do? I asked. Respond publicly? That might be playing into his hands, Eliza cautioned. He wants to draw you into a public debate, where he can control the narrative. She was right. A text-based argument on the community forum would only escalate tensions and force people to choose sides. I needed another approach, something that would honor my grandfather's legacy while asserting my rights in a way the community could understand and respect. The answer came to me as I was looking through old photographs that afternoon. In one faded image, my grandfather stood beside a newly planted maple sapling in the corner of the yard. The caption on the back, written in his neat handwriting, read, Community Tree Planting Day, 1978. Everyone leaves a legacy. I called Mayor Langston immediately. I need your advice, I said when he answered, and possibly your help. 2 days later, a different kind of notice appeared on the Maple Glen Community Forum, the Blake Legacy Project, an invitation. In honor of former Mayor Edward Blake's commitment to community education and environmental stewardship, his granddaughter Cynthia Blake is establishing the Blake Legacy Project. Beginning next month, the project will offer seasonal workshops on sustainable gardening, native plant identification, and local ecology to be held at various locations throughout Maple Glen. Additionally, the Blake property will host quarterly open garden days, allowing community members to enjoy the historic space while learning about its unique flora and conservation techniques. My grandfather believed in sharing knowledge, not just space, says Cynthia Blake. This project continues his legacy of community education while respecting private property boundaries. Mayor Langston has endorsed the initiative, calling it a thoughtful balance of personal rights and community engagement, exactly the kind of solution Edward Blake would have crafted. For more information or to volunteer, please contact the Maple Glen Historical Society. The response was immediate and largely positive. Comments praised the constructive solution and respectful compromise. Even some who had initially sided with Peter's vision acknowledged that scheduled access was a reasonable alternative to unlimited entry. Peter himself remained conspicuously silent on the forum, but I received an unexpected visit from Janice the following morning. "It's brilliant," she said, accepting the cup of coffee I offered. "You've completely outmaneuvered him, without seeming to try." "That wasn't my intention," I replied honestly. "I just wanted to find a way to honor my grandfather while maintaining my boundaries." She smiled knowingly. Intentional or not, it's worked. Peter was up half the night trying to figure out how to respond without seeming petty. He can't publicly oppose a community education project named after a beloved former mayor. And, privately, he's furious, she admitted. But that's his problem, not yours. As she rose to leave, she hesitated. "I've volunteered to help with the first workshop, if that's okay with you." The offer surprised me. "Of course. We could use the help." "Good," she said with a small smile. "It feels right to be part of something constructive for a change." After she left, I walked out to the garden and sat beneath the maple tree, now a towering giant from the sapling in my grandfather's photograph. The morning sun filtered through its leaves, casting dappled shadows across the lawn. For the first time since returning to Maple Glen, I felt truly at peace. Not because I had won a battle or silenced my critics, but because I had found a way to honor both my grandfather's generosity and his respect for boundaries. Some fights aren't meant to be won through confrontation, but through connection. Some victories come not from defeating an opponent, but from changing the nature of the contest itself. The garden would remain mine, private, protected, precious, but its legacy would belong to everyone. The first workshop of the Blake Legacy Project took place on a perfect September morning. Dew still clung to the grass as I arranged folding chairs in a semicircle on the town green, facing a display table laden with native plant specimens, seed packets, and illustrated guidebooks. "Need any help?" called a voice, and I looked up to see Mrs. Finch approaching, carrying a thermos. "I brought coffee. Figured we might need it." "You're a lifesaver," I said gratefully, accepting a steaming cup. "I was up half the night preparing the materials." "Your grandfather did the same thing before every town meeting," she chuckled. "Always overthinking, always over-preparing. You're more like him than you realize." We continued setting up as the morning brightened. Eliza arrived with boxes of handouts from the Historical Society, followed by Mayor Langston, who brought a portable microphone system. To my surprise, several local business owners appeared with donations. The bakery sent a tray of muffins, the garden center contributed seed packets for participants, and the local bookshop owner arrived with a stack of field guides at a steep discount. "Word got around that you were doing something special," the bookshop owner explained with a wink. "Some of us old-timers. Remember how your grandfather supported our businesses when the big box stores tried to move in? Figured it was time to return the favor." By 10 o'clock, people began to gather. I had expected perhaps a dozen participants for this first event, mostly older residents who had known my grandfather. Instead, nearly 30 people of all ages showed up, including several young families with children. Janice arrived early, dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt, a stark departure from her usual polished appearance. She worked quietly alongside me, arranging handouts and greeting people with genuine warmth. There was no sign of Peter. "He's at a business conference in Burlington," she explained when I finally asked. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" At 10:30, I stepped to the microphone, my heart racing. Public speaking had never been my strength, but for my grandfather's legacy, I would push through the fear. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Welcome to the first workshop of the Blake Legacy Project. My grandfather believed that understanding our local environment was the first step to protecting it. Today, we'll be exploring the native plants of Maple Glen and learning how they support our local ecosystem. For the next hour, I led the group through an interactive presentation, sharing knowledge my grandfather had passed down to me about the flora that thrived in Vermont's climate. The children were particularly engaged, eagerly identifying plants from the picture cards I distributed and asking surprisingly insightful questions. "Miss Blake?" asked a freckle-faced boy of about 9. "If these plants are native and good for the environment, why do people plant other kinds in their yards?" "That's an excellent question," I replied. "Sometimes people choose plants for their appearance without considering their ecological impact. One goal of this project is to help people make more informed choices." After the presentation, we divided into small groups for a plant identification walk around the green. I found myself leading a cluster of enthusiastic children and their parents, while Mrs. Finch took the seniors and Janice guided a group of younger adults. As we explored, I noticed a subtle shift in how people interacted with me. The awkward avoidance that had followed the block party confrontation was gone, replaced by genuine engagement and respect. Several participants mentioned how much they were looking forward to the open garden day scheduled for the following month. "My mother talked about your grandfather's garden parties for years after she moved to the retirement home," one woman told me. "She'll be so pleased to hear the tradition is continuing, even in a new form." The workshop concluded with a seed planting activity, each participant taking home a biodegradable pot containing native wildflower seeds. As people dispersed, many lingered to help clean up or to share memories of my grandfather. Janice stayed until the end, helping to fold chairs and pack supplies into my car. "That was remarkable," she said as we finished. "You've created something beautiful here." "We all did," I corrected her. "I couldn't have done it alone." She hesitated, then said, "Peter's been talking about putting the house on the market, moving somewhere with more opportunity." "Oh," I replied, unsure how to respond. "I'm sorry to hear that." She shook her head. "Don't be. It might be for the best." A sad smile crossed her face. "I used to think I needed his vision of success to be happy. Now I'm not so sure." Before I could respond, Mayor Langston approached, beaming with approval. "Cynthia, that was exactly what this town needed. You found a way to honor your grandfather's legacy while creating something entirely new. The council is very impressed." "Thank you, Mayor. That means a lot. In fact," he continued, "we'd like to discuss making the Blake Legacy Project an official town initiative, with modest funding for materials and possibly an educational stipend for you as the coordinator. Would you be interested?" The offer caught me completely off guard. Yes, I'd be very interested. Thank you." "Excellent. My secretary will set up a meeting next week to discuss the details." He nodded politely to Janice before walking away, leaving me stunned. "Well," Janice said with a genuine smile, "it seems the tables have turned." Over the following weeks, the Blake Legacy Project grew beyond my expectations. The town council approved funding for monthly workshops, educational materials, and a small stipend that allowed me to reduce my freelance work hours and focus more on developing the program. The October Open Garden Day brought over 50 visitors to my backyard, now officially designated as the Blake Educational Garden. I conducted guided tours explaining the various native plant sections, the rain garden that managed stormwater runoff, and the butterfly sanctuary in the sunniest corner. Mrs. Finch stationed herself by the gazebo, regaling visitors with stories about my grandfather's time as mayor. Eliza from the Historical Society set up a small exhibit of photographs documenting the garden's evolution over the decades. Even Mayor Langston attended, bringing several council members who expressed interest in implementing similar native plantings in the town's public spaces. Peter Vaughn was conspicuously absent, though rumors circulated that the "for sale" sign would soon appear in front of the Tudor Revival across the street. Janice attended briefly, quieter than usual, but seemingly at peace with whatever changes were coming in her life. As the last visitors departed and twilight settled over the garden, I found myself alone beneath the maple tree, wrapped in a cardigan against the October chill. A sense of profound rightness washed over me, not triumph over adversaries or vindication of rights, but the deeper satisfaction of having found my purpose. The garden remained private, but its impact had expanded beyond its boundaries. My grandfather would have approved. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. I opened the door to find Peter Vaughn standing on my porch, looking distinctly uncomfortable. He had lost some of his usual polish. His shirt slightly rumpled, his confident posture diminished. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice lacking its customary authority. Curious despite my reservations, I nodded and led him to the living room. He declined my offer of coffee, seemingly eager to say his piece and depart. "I'll be direct," he began after an awkward silence. "Janice and I are separating. The house goes on the market next week. I've accepted a position with a development firm in Chicago." "I'm sorry about your marriage," I said, and meant it. Whatever my feelings about Peter, I had grown to respect and even like Janice over the past months. He waved away my sympathy. "It's been coming for some time. We want different things." He paused, visibly struggling with his next words. "Before I leave, I wanted to clear the air. About the garden, the raffle, all of it." I waited, giving him space to continue. "When we moved here, I had a vision for Maple Glen. Modernizing while preserving its charm, increasing property values, making it a destination rather than just a nice place to live." He sighed. "Your grandfather's legacy stood in the way of certain changes I wanted to implement. The garden especially complicated a greenway project I designed. So it was never about community access," I said, pieces falling into place. "It was about development." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Not entirely. I do believe in shared spaces. But yes, there were other motivations." "Why are you telling me this now?" Peter looked around the room, his gaze settling on a photograph of my grandfather on the mantelpiece. "Because Janice was right about one thing. Your grandfather built something authentic here, something worth preserving." He met my eyes directly. "And so have you, with this legacy project. It's not what I would have done, but it's genuine. The town has responded to that." The admission clearly cost him, and I found myself respecting his honesty, if not his past actions. "I wish you well in Chicago," I said as he rose to leave. At the door, he paused. "The new buyers. They're a young family with 3 kids. The wife is a botanist at the university. I thought they might appreciate living across from the Blake Educational Garden." With that surprising parting gesture, he was gone. 2 days later, Janice appeared at my door with a bottle of wine and a tentative smile. "I hear Peter paid you a visit," she said as I welcomed her in. "Was it terribly awkward?" "Surprisingly not," I admitted, pouring 2 glasses. "He seemed different." "Defeat will do that," she replied with a small smile. "Though I think it's more complex than simply losing a battle over a garden. Peter's realizing that influence without purpose is ultimately hollow." We settled on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the garden in amber light. The air was crisp with approaching winter, but the thick sweaters and glasses of red wine kept us warm. "What will you do now?" I asked. Janice took a thoughtful sip of wine. "Stay, I think. I've accepted a position with the Historical Society. Eliza needs help with their digital archives, and I've put an offer on a small cottage near the lake." She smiled. "It has a tiny yard, but good bones." I thought, "Perhaps you might advise me on native plants come spring." "I'd like that," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "You know," she mused, "when we first moved here, I envied people like you, people with roots, with history, with a place they truly belonged. I thought we could create that by force of will and social positioning. And now? Now I understand that belonging isn't something you can demand or manufacture. It grows naturally, like your garden, when you nurture the right conditions." She raised her glass in a small toast. "To putting down roots of my own, at last." As winter approached and the garden went dormant, the Blake Legacy Project continued with indoor workshops at the community center, winter seed starting, conservation planning, and ecological landscaping design. Each session drew more participants than the last, creating a growing community of environmental stewards throughout Maple Glen. I often thought about my grandfather during those gatherings, imagining his approval as knowledge was shared and connections formed. The garden slept beneath a blanket of snow, but its impact continued to spread throughout the town, one seed at a time. December arrived with swirling snow and holiday preparations. Maple Glen transformed into a postcard New England Christmas scene. White lights twinkled in shop windows, wreaths adorned historic doors, and the town square's massive spruce tree became a beacon of colored lights, visible from blocks away. I was hanging a pine garland on my front porch when a silver SUV pulled into the driveway across the street. A young couple emerged, followed by 3 children bundled in bright winter coats. The Andersons, the new owners of the Vaughn house, had arrived for their final walkthrough before closing. Emma Anderson spotted me and waved enthusiastically, then crossed the street with her eldest daughter in tow. I remembered from our brief introduction when they'd come to view the house that she was indeed a botanist, specializing in northeastern ecosystems, exactly as Peter had mentioned. "Cynthia, we're finally here," she called, her cheeks pink from the cold. "The moving truck comes tomorrow." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I replied, climbing down from my stepladder to greet her properly. "You must be excited to settle in before Christmas." "Beyond excited," she agreed. "We've been in temporary housing for months while the sale processed." She gestured to her daughter, a serious-looking girl of about 12. "Lily here can't wait to see your educational garden. She's already planning her science fair project around native pollinator plants." The girl nodded earnestly. "Mom says you know everything about Vermont flowers and bugs and stuff." I laughed. "Not everything, but I'm happy to share what I do." "No, though you'll have to wait until spring to see much besides snow in the garden." "Actually," Emma said with academic enthusiasm, "winter observation is incredibly valuable for understanding garden ecosystems. The dormant period reveals structural elements normally hidden by foliage." Her daughter rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Mom turns everything into a science lesson. A woman after my own heart," I replied with a smile. "You're welcome to observe the dormant garden anytime. The gate's not locked." "Really?" Lily's eyes widened. "Can I go look now?" After a nod of permission from her mother, the girl darted around to the garden gate and disappeared into the backyard. "I hope that's truly okay," Emma said. "We've heard about the garden access situation from the realtor. I wouldn't want to overstep." "It's completely fine," I assured her. "The issue was never about people appreciating the garden. It was about respect for boundaries and permission." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Boundaries are essential in healthy ecosystems, too. Nature thrives on clear delineations that are nevertheless permeable under the right conditions." I liked her immediately. "Would you like to come in for coffee? Or hot chocolate for the kids? You must be freezing after your drive." The spontaneous invitation surprised us both, but Emma accepted warmly. Soon her husband Mark and their 2 younger children joined us, and my quiet house filled with the comforting chaos of family life, something it hadn't experienced in years. As the children explored the living room, examining my grandfather's collection of bird carvings with careful hands, Emma and Mark shared their journey to Maple Glen, his new position at the regional hospital, her research grant at the university, their desire to raise their children in a community with strong environmental values. "When we saw this house listed, it seemed too perfect," Mark explained. "And then when we learned about your educational garden project during our first visit, it sealed the deal." "Peter Vaughn seemed very eager to mention it," Emma added with a slight smile, almost as if he was using it as a selling point, which struck us as odd given what the realtor had told us about the disagreement. I found myself recounting the entire saga, my grandfather's legacy, the garden encroachments, the block party confrontation, and the eventual resolution through the legacy project. To my surprise, telling the story no longer stirred anger or resentment, just a quiet satisfaction at how things had ultimately unfolded. "Well, we're firmly on Team Blake," Mark declared, raising his mug in a toast. "Respectful neighbors who ask permission before entering private property." "Though we hope for lots of permission," Emma added, with a laugh. "I wasn't joking about Lily's science project. That girl has been plant-obsessed since she could walk." As if summoned, Lily burst through the back door, her face glowing with excitement despite the cold. "There's a massive owl in your maple tree. Can I set up my wildlife camera to monitor it?" And just like that, a new chapter began. The Andersons' arrival marked a turning point for the neighborhood. Unlike the Vaughns, who had sought to impose their vision on the community, Emma and Mark integrated seamlessly, offering their talents while respecting local traditions. Emma joined the Blake Legacy Project as a scientific advisor, bringing academic rigor to our workshops. Mark volunteered at the community health clinic on weekends. Their children became regular visitors to my garden, always asking permission, always treating the space with respect. Christmas brought an unexpected gift from Mayor Langston, official designation of the Blake Educational Garden as a living laboratory for the town's schools, complete with a small grant for educational signage and materials. The accompanying note read, "Your grandfather believed education was the greatest gift we could offer. Future generations. You've found a way to continue that legacy while creating something uniquely your own. Maple Glen is fortunate to have another Blake watching over its future. I spent Christmas Eve at Mrs. Finch's annual gathering, surrounded by longtime residents who shared stories of holidays past. For the first time since returning to Maple Glen, I felt truly at home. Not just as Edward, Blake's granddaughter, but as Cynthia Blake, a person of value in my own right. January brought heavy snows and quiet contemplation. I used the garden's dormant season to develop new curriculum for spring workshops, collaborate with the local schools on educational programs, and restore some of my grandfather's old gardening journals, a treasure trove of local wisdom that had nearly been lost. 1. Snowy afternoon, a knock at the door revealed Janice, bundled against the cold, holding a thick folder. I found these while cleaning out my new place, she explained as I welcomed her in. They're Peter's original plans for the neighborhood green space initiative. I thought you should have them. Over tea at the kitchen table, we examined the documents. Detailed proposals for converting several private properties, including mine, into a connected network of pathways and small parks. The ultimate goal, revealed in the final pages, was to increase adjacent property values and attract upscale development. He really had it all mapped out, I murmured, studying a rendering that showed my backyard transformed into a manicured space with paved walkways and decorative water features. Nothing like the naturalistic garden my grandfather had created. Peter always has a plan, Janice replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. He sees the world as a series of assets to be optimized. And how are you seeing the world these days? I asked. A genuine smile warmed her face. As a place where I get to decide what matters. My cottage is tiny compared to the Tudor, but it's mine. I'm taking a watercolor class at the community center. I'm learning to identify birds. She laughed softly. Small joys, but real ones. Those are the best kind, I agreed. My grandfather used to say that happiness compounds like interest. Small daily dividends eventually create the richest life. As winter deepened, I received occasional updates about Peter from Janice or through town gossip. He had indeed taken the position in Chicago, was living in a luxury high-rise, and had recently been quoted in a business magazine about revitalizing overlooked urban spaces, a sanitized version of what he'd attempted in Maple Glen. I felt no satisfaction in his departure, no sense of having won a contest. If anything, I felt a touch of sadness that he had missed the opportunity to genuinely connect with the community he had tried so hard to reshape. February brought planning meetings for the town's annual Maple Festival. To my surprise, the committee asked if the educational garden could be included as a featured attraction. We're focusing on sustainability this year, explained the festival chairperson. Your grandfather always tapped his maple trees for the festival. We thought you might want to continue the tradition. The request touched me deeply. I remembered helping Grandpa collect sap as a child, watching in wonder as it transformed into amber syrup over the wood-fired evaporator he set up in the driveway each spring. I'd be honored, I replied, though I'll need help setting up the equipment. It's been years since I've done it. Already taken care of, the chairperson assured me. 3 longtime festival volunteers have offered to help. They say your grandfather taught them everything they know about maple sugaring. As February melted into March, the garden began to stir from its winter sleep. The first crocuses pushed through patches of snow beneath the maple trees, and birdsong returned to the morning air. The Andersons' children made daily visits to monitor the signs of spring, keeping detailed journals of each new bloom and returning insect. One mild Saturday, I was turning the compost pile, a task my grandfather had always claimed was meditation with a pitchfork, when I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. A moment later, Peter Vaughn appeared at the garden gate. He looked different, the polished corporate veneer replaced by casual clothes and a less rigid posture. When he saw me, he raised a hand in tentative greeting. I was in town finalizing some paperwork, he explained as I approached. Thought I should say a proper goodbye to the place. How's Chicago? I asked, leaning my pitchfork against the fence. Efficient. Impressive. Impersonal. He glanced around the garden, where green shoots were emerging from the thawing soil. Different from here. We stood in surprisingly comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. The Legacy Project is thriving from what I hear. Emma mentioned it's been incorporated into the school curriculum. I nodded. Starting this spring, the 5th graders will be designing and planting a native butterfly garden at the elementary school, based on what they learn here. Your grandfather would have approved, he said, and there was no mockery or manipulation in his tone, just a simple acknowledgement of truth. Yes, he would have, I agreed. Peter gestured toward the house across the street, where Emma could be seen through the window, helping her youngest child with what appeared to be an art project. They're good people, better neighbors than I was. They respect boundaries, I said, unable to resist the gentle dig. To my surprise, he laughed, a genuine sound without the calculated charm he usually projected. Touché, Cynthia Blake, well deserved. As he turned to leave, he hesitated. For what it's worth, I was wrong about the garden. What you've created here, it has more value than any development I could have proposed. The admission clearly cost him something, and I respected him for making it. Thank you for saying that, I replied. He nodded once, then walked back to his car without looking back. I returned to the compost pile, turning the rich, dark matter that would nourish the coming season's growth. Like the garden itself, life moved in cycles of death and renewal, conflict and resolution, winter dormancy and spring awakening. The ground was thawing, new growth was emerging, and in this quiet corner of Maple Glen, roots ran deep and strong beneath the surface, anchoring both memory and possibility in the same fertile soil. The sap began to flow in mid-March, when daytime temperatures rose above freezing while nights remained cold. Following my grandfather's tradition, I placed metal taps in 3 mature maple trees at the garden's edge, hanging metal buckets to collect the clear, watery liquid that would eventually become syrup. Emma Anderson's scientific interest was immediately piqued, and she brought her children over daily to check the collection progress and measure the sugar content with a refractometer she borrowed from her university lab. The sugar concentration varies depending on the tree's location, sun, exposure, and even its root system, she explained to her fascinated children as they recorded data in their notebooks. It's a beautiful example of how trees respond to their environment. The Maple Festival was scheduled for the first weekend in April, giving us 3 weeks of collection time. Following my grandfather's meticulous notes, I set up his old evaporator, a large flat pan positioned over a carefully controlled wood fire in the driveway. The process of transforming 40 gallons of sap into a single gallon of syrup was labor-intensive, requiring constant attention to temperature and consistent additions of fresh sap as the water evaporated. Word spread through town that Old Blake's Sugar Shack was operational again, and neighbors began to stop by. First, the elderly residents, who remembered my grandfather's annual tradition, then younger families curious about the process. What started as a simple demonstration for the Maple Festival evolved into an impromptu community gathering. Mark Anderson proved handy with maintaining the perfect fire temperature, while Mrs. Finch organized a rotating schedule of volunteers to help with the round-the-clock monitoring. Even Mayor Langston spent an evening adding wood to the fire and sharing stories of festivals past. Your grandfather used to let me taste test the syrup, he recalled, watching the steaming sap with nostalgic eyes. Said I had the most discerning palate in town, probably just being kind to an awkward teenager who was interested in local politics. He never said things he didn't mean, I replied, stirring the thickening liquid. If he said you had a good palate, he meant it. The mayor smiled. That was Edward's gift, seeing potential in people and places that others overlooked. As we worked together under the stars, the sweet steam rising into the cold night air, I felt my grandfather's presence more strongly than I had in years. Not as a ghost or spirit, but as a continuation, a thread of values, and traditions that ran unbroken through time. The night before the festival, the final batch of syrup reached perfect density, 226 degrees Fahrenheit, exactly as my grandfather's notes prescribed. I filtered the amber liquid into sterilized glass bottles, while Emma's children designed labels featuring illustrations of the garden's maple trees. The finished products, 32 bottles of pure maple syrup, were arranged on the kitchen table, gleaming like liquid gold in the morning light. They're beautiful, Emma whispered, examining a bottle with scientific appreciation. A perfect demonstration of natural chemistry and human tradition working together. The Maple Festival transformed Maple Glen's town green into a celebration of local heritage and sustainability. Booths featuring local artisans, environmental organizations, and food vendors formed a circle around the central gazebo, where musicians played traditional folk tunes throughout the day. The Blake Educational Garden was designated as a special off-site attraction, with shuttle buses running from the town green every 30 minutes. I had worried about having so many visitors at once, but with careful planning and the help of volunteers, we created a one-way path through the garden with educational stations highlighting sustainable practices, native plants, and of course, the maple sugaring process. Mayor Langston officially opened the garden tour with a brief ceremony, unveiling a new plaque at the entrance. The Edward Blake Educational Garden, where knowledge grows. The simple bronze marker brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This garden has always been more than just a beautiful space, the mayor told the gathered crowd. Under Edward Blake's care, it was a classroom without walls, teaching generations about our connection to the natural world. His granddaughter Cynthia has not only preserved this legacy, but expanded it for future generations. Throughout the day, over 200 people visited the garden. Each received a small brochure outlining the Blake Legacy Project's mission and upcoming workshops, along with a native wildflower seed packet as a souvenir. Bottles of our maple syrup sold out within the first 2 hours, with all proceeds going to fund educational supplies for future workshops. Mrs. Finch stationed herself in the gazebo, sharing stories about my grandfather with visitors. Eliza from the Historical Society created a timeline display showing the garden's evolution over 7 decades. The Anderson children served as enthusiastic junior guides, proudly showing off their scientific observation journals to impressed adults. By late afternoon, as the festival wound down and the final tour group departed, I found a quiet moment alone beneath the largest maple tree. Its branches, still mostly bare but studded with swelling buds, formed a protective canopy overhead. Somewhere nearby, a white-throated sparrow sang its distinctive melody, a sound my grandfather had taught me to recognize before I could even read. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered, placing my hand against the tree's rough bark. "We preserved your legacy, but made it something new, too." The evening brought an unexpected email from the Vermont Environmental Education Association, announcing that the Blake Legacy Project had been nominated for their annual Community Impact Award. The nomination letter, forwarded by Mayor Langston, cited the project's innovative approach to connecting historical preservation with environmental education, and its success in bridging generational and ideological divides within the community. I forwarded the news to Mrs. Finch and Eliza, then sat on the back porch with a small glass of maple syrup, a tradition my grandfather had maintained after each successful sugaring season. "Nature's perfect reward," he had called it, allowing himself just 1 spoonful of the precious liquid straight from the bottle. As spring advanced, the garden exploded with life and color. Daffodils and tulips gave way to bleeding hearts and columbines. The vegetable beds, expanded with Emma's scientific guidance, sprouted neat rows of lettuce, peas, and radishes. The butterfly garden, replanted with additional native species, attracted a growing population of pollinators. The Blake Legacy Project continued to evolve as well. Monthly workshops now regularly drew participants from neighboring towns. The school program expanded to include all elementary grades, with age-appropriate activities ranging from simple seed starting for kindergartners to ecosystem mapping for 5th graders. In May, Janice invited me to see her cottage garden, transformed under my guidance from a patchy lawn to a thriving native plant sanctuary. Though smaller than my own garden, it had a charm all its own. Wildflowers chosen for their bright colors, bird feeders positioned for optimal viewing from her kitchen window, and a small pond that attracted frogs and dragonflies. "It brings me joy every single day," she said as we sat on her porch swing, watching goldfinches visit the coneflowers. "I never understood before why you fought so hard for your garden. Now, I do. It's not just about the plants," I replied. "It's about creating a space that reflects who you are and what you value." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I heard from Peter last week. He's engaged to another developer he met in Chicago. They're planning some massive revitalization project in Detroit. Are you okay?" I asked gently. A genuine smile crossed her face. "More than okay. I realized something important after he left. I spent years trying to want what he wanted, value what he valued. Now I'm discovering what matters to me." She gestured to her simple but charming cottage. "It turns out I prefer this to a showpiece tutor that never felt like home." As June approached, I received a formal invitation to the Vermont Environmental Education Association's annual conference, where the Community Impact Award would be presented. The ceremony would be held at a lakeside retreat center near Burlington, with Mayor Langston, Eliza, and representatives from the school board, planning to attend in support. The night before our departure, I found myself too excited to sleep. Sitting at my grandfather's desk in the study, I leafed through one of his old journals, drawing comfort from his familiar handwriting. A passage from spring 1985 caught my eye. "Planted 3 new varieties of native asters today with young Cindy's help. Her small hands are remarkably gentle with the seedlings. A born gardener, though she doesn't know it yet. She asked why we plant flowers that won't bloom until fall. Patience, I told her, is the gardener's greatest virtue. We plant today for tomorrow's beauty. She considered this with a child's seriousness, then replied, like how you're the mayor now, so our town will be nice when I grow up. Wisdom from the mouth of babes. Yes, dear Cindy, exactly like that. We tend the gardens of today so others may enjoy their beauty tomorrow. Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal. All this time, I had thought I was preserving my grandfather's legacy. In reality, I was fulfilling it, continuing the work he had always intended for me to carry forward in my own way. The award ceremony exceeded all expectations. The Blake Legacy Project received not only the Community Impact Award, but also a substantial grant to expand its educational offerings. In my acceptance speech, I acknowledged everyone who had contributed to the project's success, from Mrs. Finch and Mayor Langston to Emma Anderson and the enthusiastic schoolchildren who now called the garden their outdoor classroom. My grandfather believed that education wasn't something confined to schoolrooms, I told the audience. It happened in gardens and forests, at kitchen tables and community gatherings. The greatest lessons often come from simply paying attention to the world around us and recognizing our place within it, not as conquerors of nature, but as its students and stewards. The drive back to Maple Glen with Mayor Langston was filled with excited planning for how to use the grant funds. We could develop a formal curriculum that other communities could adapt, he suggested. Your grandfather always believed that good ideas should be shared freely. I'd like to create a scholarship too, I added, for a local student pursuing environmental education or sustainable agriculture. As we crested the final hill before Maple Glen, the town spread out below us in the June sunshine. Church steeples, the town green, the winding river, and patchwork of gardens and streets that made up our community. My grandfather had seen the same view countless times, watching over the town he loved. Now it was my turn to contribute to its story. 1 year after the confrontation at the block party, Maple Glen prepared for the annual celebration once again. This time, instead of tension and hidden agendas, the atmosphere buzzed with genuine community spirit. The Blake Legacy Project had been formally incorporated as a non-profit organization with a diverse board of directors including Emma Anderson, Mrs. Finch, Mayor Langston, and representatives from the school system and local businesses. Our educational programs now reached over 500 participants annually, and the curriculum had been adopted by 3 neighboring towns. The Edward Blake Memorial Scholarship had been awarded to its first recipient, a promising high school senior who planned to study ecological restoration at the University of Vermont. The garden itself had been designated a certified wildlife habitat and a demonstration site for sustainable landscaping practices. All these accomplishments would be celebrated at the block party, where the Legacy Project would host a booth showcasing its work and offering native plant seedlings to interested community members. The morning of the party, I stood in my garden performing a final assessment. The summer blooms were at their peak. Purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, bee balm, and garden phlox created a tapestry of color that attracted butterflies, bees, and hummingbirds. The vegetable beds, expanded with help from school children, overflowed with tomatoes, beans, cucumbers, and herbs. Most importantly, the garden remained a sanctuary, my private space, generously shared on my own terms through scheduled tours, workshops, and educational events. The boundaries that had once been challenged were now respected, allowing for meaningful connection without intrusion. A knock at the gate revealed Lily Anderson, now 13 and serving as the Legacy Project's youngest volunteer. Ms. Blake, Mom sent me to remind you we're setting up the booth in 30 minutes. I'll be right there, I promised, just gathering the last of the seedlings. As Lily helped me load trays of native plant starts into my car, she chattered enthusiastically about the monarch butterfly research project she'd designed based on observations in my garden. Her scientific passion reminded me of my grandfather, who had approached gardening with the same combination of analytical precision and boundless wonder. The town green was already bustling when we arrived. Colorful canopies dotted the lawn, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. Our booth, positioned prominently near the entrance, featured photographs of workshop participants, children's artwork inspired by garden visits, and educational displays about native ecosystems. As I arranged the seedling trays, Mayor Langston approached with a distinguished-looking woman I didn't recognize. Cynthia, I'd like you to meet Senator Caroline Winters. She's here to learn about the Legacy Project as part of her committee work on community-based environmental education. I shook the senator's hand, honored by her interest. For the next half hour, I guided her through our displays, explaining the project's evolution and impact. Her questions were thoughtful and informed, suggesting genuine interest rather than political posturing. "What you've created here goes beyond environmental education," she observed as we concluded the tour. "You've developed a model for how communities can resolve conflicts over shared resources through collaborative engagement rather than adversarial processes." Her comment struck me as particularly insightful. What had begun as a battle over property rights had transformed into something that strengthened rather than divided the community. As the day progressed, the Legacy Project booth became a gathering spot for conversations about gardening, conservation, and community initiatives. Former workshop participants stopped by to share success stories from their own gardens. Children proudly showed off their nature journals. Even Janice made an appearance, bringing photographs of her cottage garden's transformation to add to our display. Late in the afternoon, as I was demonstrating seed-saving techniques to a group of interested gardeners, I noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd. Peter Vaughn, looking somewhat out of place in his business casual attire, observed the demonstration from a respectful distance. When the group dispersed, he approached hesitantly. "Hello, Cynthia. Quite a different scene from last year's block party." "Peter," I acknowledged with a nod. "I didn't expect to see you back in Maple Glen. Just passing through," he explained. "Finalizing some paperwork on the house sale. Thought I'd see how the town was doing." An awkward silence fell between us, filled with unspoken history. "I've been following your project online," he finally said. "The educational initiatives, the scholarship, the state recognition. It's impressive." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by his apparent sincerity. "Turns out your vision for the garden was more valuable than mine would have been," he admitted. "I was thinking in terms of property values and amenities. You were thinking about legacy and education." "Different priorities," I said simply. He nodded, glancing around at the festive scene. "The senator's visit is no small thing. There's talk of using your model for a statewide initiative." "So I've heard. It's still hard to believe." "Sometimes?" Peter's expression turned reflective. "Your grandfather would have been proud, not just of what you've created, but how you created it, by standing your ground while still finding a way to benefit the community. That means a lot coming from you," I said, and found that I meant it. As he turned to leave, he hesitated. "For what it's worth, I learned something important from our conflict. Success isn't always about getting exactly what you want. Sometimes it's about finding a better solution than the one you originally envisioned." With a final nod, he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood for a moment, processing the unexpected encounter. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no Hollywood moment of forgiveness or friendship, just a quiet acknowledgement of growth and perspective gained through conflict and resolution. The raffle drawing began on the main stage, reminiscent of last year's event, but with a fundamentally different energy. Instead of tension and hidden agendas, there was genuine community celebration. Mayor Langston drew the winning tickets, announcing prizes donated by local businesses and artisans. When he announced the grand prize, HIA, Garden Consultation Package, donated by the Blake Legacy Project, I stepped onto the stage to present the certificate to the winner, a retired couple who had recently moved to town. "Congratulations," I said, handing them the framed certificate. "This includes a personalized native plant design for your property, along with starter plants from our educational garden and ongoing support as you establish your own sustainable landscape." The woman clasped my hands warmly. "We've been attending your workshops since we moved here in April. You've created something special in this town, dear." As the party wound down and the summer sun began its descent, I walked home slowly, savoring the warm evening air and the satisfaction of a day well spent. Mrs. Finch fell into step beside me as I turned onto Maple Street. "Quite a difference from last year," she observed with a knowing smile. "Like night and day," I agreed. "I saw Peter Vaughn lurking about," she said. "Checking up on his former kingdom, I suppose." I smiled at her characterization. Actually, he was surprisingly gracious, almost philosophical about how things turned out. She harumphed skeptically. "Well, I suppose even the most stubborn people can learn eventually. Your grandfather always said that given enough time, truth and integrity will prevail over manipulation and self-interest." "He was right about so many things," I said softly. We paused at my gate, the garden visible beyond. peaceful in the golden evening light. Mrs. Finch patted my arm affectionately. Edward would be proud of you, Cynthia. Not because you won some neighborhood battle, but because you found a way to honor his legacy while creating something uniquely yours. After she continued on her way, I entered the garden and followed the stone path to the maple tree, the centerpiece of this space that had been both battleground and sanctuary. Sitting on the bench beneath its spreading branches, I felt a profound sense of peace. The struggle over this land had never really been about property rights or community access. It had been about identity and belonging, about honoring the past while creating space for the future. In fighting for my grandfather's legacy, I had discovered my own purpose. The garden would continue to evolve, as gardens do. New plants would thrive while others faded. Children like Lily Anderson would grow, up exploring its paths, perhaps becoming the next generation of environmental stewards. The Legacy Project would adapt to meet changing community needs. And through it all, this space would remain what it had always been, a private sanctuary, generously shared but never surrendered. A place where roots ran deep and new growth reached skyward. A living testament to the power of standing firm for what matters while finding ways to nurture connection and community. As twilight settled over Maple Glen, I whispered the words my grandfather had often repeated when admiring his garden in the evening hours. We plant seeds today for flowers we may never see bloom. That's the gardener's faith, and perhaps life's greatest lesson. Some battles aren't meant to be won through confrontation, but through persistence and principle. Some victories come not from defeating an opponent, but from transforming the very nature of the conflict itself. And sometimes, the most powerful legacy we can leave is not what we build or own, but what we nurture and share. The garden remained mine, private, protected, precious, but its impact belonged to everyone.